In contrast to some of the other days we've done so far, day 8 was set to be quite an easy one. We only actually planned to do about 7 or so miles and only 2 locks. It was also time for us to part company with Kat and Andy. They were heading on to Bedford and we were going to have to turn round and start heading back. And after a leisurely start, we headed through the lock at St Ives and towards the lock at Browns Hill. Compared to the canals, the river had always been so clear, and we just marvelled at the detail that you could see. I'd also been very interested in the variation in locks that we'd seen on this journey, and this lock is no different. It's got a guillotine at both ends, all electrically operated. When we're going into the locks that are sizably bigger than the boat, we like to put a centre line on to keep the boat steady when the water's rising or falling. Susie's a past master at using the centre line to control the boat on the way in, and the trick here is not to snatch that line too tight and to sort of feed the boat to a stop gently. It's only a very short run from the lock back to Westview Marina. We plan to moor up on the visitors' pontoon there for the night and really just spend the afternoon enjoying the beautiful weather. It was so lovely and sunny. Good morning. So we're on the tidal stretch of the New Bedford River by Erith at the moment. We're about to tackle a stretch of river known as the 100-foot drain, or the New Bedford River. It's about 20 miles long and it's tidal. So I've read a lot about it and I've spoken to the lock keepers and got some advice, but it's going to be a bit of a challenge I think today. But very important before we leave on a journey like this is to really prepare the boat. So I'm going to spend an hour or so doing some engine checks, filling up with water, just making sure the boat's just as it needs to be, make sure the anchor's all set up properly in case we have a problem. I don't think it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to make sure the boat's all ready before we leave. So it's about an hour later. I've done my engine checks. I also decided to have a little peep down the weed hatch because it felt a little bit vibraty when we came in last night, and I found wrapped around the prop some bits of string, not really thick enough to be rope and not really thick enough to affect the boat travelling, but certainly something you don't want on the boat when you're about to head off. Something else just to trip you up later in the day. So we've cleaned the weed hatch off, the prop's all nice and clear now, and we're pretty much ready to go. Just get rid of a bit of rubbish, do the washing up, and we'll be on our way. So with the boat all nicely prepared, we headed off in the direction of the Hermitage Lock. And just before you get there is the left-hand turn that takes you down the 100-foot drain. From there it's about 20 miles in pretty much a straight line all the way to Salter's Lode. This is going to save us about 11 miles on our journey, probably saving something like 3 hours. It's not until you're actually on the river itself do you appreciate just how straight it is. This first section between Erith and Meppel is just absolutely straight as a die. It just goes on and on and on for about 5 miles. When you look at the river, it's easy to imagine that this was built with JCBs and earth movers. But actually, this river dates back to the 1600s. It's amazing to think they had the technology to manage all this floodwater and seawater even back in those times. You get a bit of a respite from the straightness and the openness when you reach the village of Meppel. There's a couple of boats moored up here, and as you can see, these swans were enjoying the shade. As you leave Meppel, you hit the really challenging piece. It's around about 19 miles long, and as you can see, it was very narrow. To make things worse, there's a lot of flotsam and jetsam comes down the channel, and as you can see, Susie was frequently up the bow with the boat hook fending this out the way. If any of this had been too big to move, we'd have had to reverse for a very long way. The sun was absolutely searing by the time we hit the sluice at Wellmore. Now this is where the old Delphi River diverges from the man-made river that we've been on. It's also the time that we were asked to call up Denver Sluice and let them know we were close. But I could tell by this time we were running perilously out of water. And then just past the Wellmore Dam, we touched the bottom and we ran aground. The tide was still ebbing at this point, but while we wiggled around a bit and got a little bit further down there, fundamentally I realised we were going to be stuck until the tide rose. Fortunately that wasn't much more than 45-50 minutes away, but we were stuck fast for a while. About an hour later we arrived at Salter's Lode. By now the tide was in full flood and the current was really quite strong. I was using roughly about half revs, 3/4 revs, and I was just stopped in the tide. Now this makes it really easy to hover and wait for the lock to be ready, but I knew it was going to make the entrance really difficult. Just before we were due to make our turn to the lock, the batteries ran out on the camera, so I can't actually show you the manoeuvre itself, but suffice it to say, my first attempt was to go well upstream and run at the lock at speed, but unfortunately the current was just too strong. I misjudged it and I had to go round a second time. So wanting to play the percentages game, this time I came up to the wharf and then rested the bow on the wharf. I used that to spin the stern out and eventually I got into the lock. Not very elegant, but safely in. After leaving Salter's Lode, it's not a very long run back to Upwell, and I for one was very glad to be on the mooring there for the evening. It's a beautiful little town. It has some small shops, some very nice walking. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this vlog. Next time we're going to be heading back towards the Nene. We'll visit Fotheringhay Castle and we'll experience a rather unusual breakdown. Until then, thank you for watching. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this episode, please click the like button and hit subscribe.